Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to keep watching the Congress of Vienna, part 1. But this is my part 2 of the part 1, right? Because I cut it down. Alright, in the last video, it's starting to heat up a little bit, between the coalitions. They can't sort of agree on what to do with Napoleon, although they agreed later that they were going to send him to Elba, right? But there's a little bit of tension there between Russia and sort of the rest of the coalition, right? But alright, leave your comments down below on what you think about this, and let's go.
I mentioned the Austrian foreign minister before, and how he had a rather dim opinion of the Russian Tsar. Biggest baby on earth, and all that. The Austrian foreign minister's name was Clemens von Metternich, and the period we're beginning to cover today is sometimes called the Age of Metternich. That's a clue as to his importance.
Yeah, and one cool thing I think is that you can actually see a photograph of Metternich in his, I don't know what age. I think you can see that him in like his, I don't know if he's in his 70s or something. And that's pretty cool because you can have a image of people who were in the Napoleonic era, right? Like we saw on Epic History TV's video on Waterloo. At the end, they showed all these pictures, old pictures, photographs of veterans of the Napoleonic Wars, which is, I think that's pretty cool.
Metternich would become the architect of the post-war international system, and one of the 19th century's most preeminent figures. Metternich's task was vastly harder than it seemed, because not only was the international system undergoing a stark transformation at the time, but so was Austria. Of course, what I'm referencing here is the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire,
which is, or was, a major thing that happened, right? Think about it, 1,000 years of Holy Roman Empire. Obviously, it didn't function as well over the 1,000 years, but still, it sort of held up its borders, right? Expanded, right? But in the sort of later stages of the Holy Roman Empire, it was Austria that controlled the Holy Roman Empire, right? Although Prussia had territory there, France, the Netherlands, but that was the Habsburgs, right?
And now my punishment for bringing up the Holy Roman Empire is that I have to explain what it was. We should begin with the French philosopher Voltaire's famous quip that the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire.
Sure.
So what was it? The Holy Roman Empire was a Central European institution that...
Well, I mean, you can argue an empire by our definition, and it should, I don't know what border this is, when this is, because it should have northern Italy and more of the west, but okay. By our definition, an empire, I think is, or I think the definition is, it has to have an emperor, and meaning it either should have the country, the empire should have either one, or I think is two or more kingdoms inside its borders, and then the emperor is the king of kings, basically, right? So you can be, let's take Prussia for example, later on when Germany becomes an empire, right? The German Empire. You have Kingdom of Prussia, you have Kingdom of, what is Saxony and Bavaria, I think. But the king of Prussia is the emperor of Germany, right? But you still have kings under the emperor, and then you have princes under the kings, right? But also you can have vast amount of territory and then just appoint an emperor and say it's an empire, right? Sort of like the Brits do with Queen Victoria. She becomes Empress of India or something like that, right? You can do that.
That had existed in one form or another for over 1,000 years. I say institution because the Holy Roman Empire was by no means a state. Each member of the empire conducted its own foreign policy, with its own military, under its own laws. Hundreds of tiny states were members of this club.
I mean, it's sort of a precursor to sort of Germany today and the US, right? With different states having different sort of legal systems, right? Right, like different laws, different way of looking at life, different way of living, military, all that, police. But this was much more complex and much more divided, right? Sure, you have different legal systems, but then foreign policy, independent militaries, right? Because in the Holy Roman Empire, they always fought each other. Always. Either it was a fight between the emperor and the church, Catholic Church, or it was a fight between the church and Protestantism, right? So there was always this kind of battle, right?
Institution, and together they loosely supported a central emperor. The Holy Roman Emperor was a prestigious title with very little actual power behind it. He could call for aid if one of the member states was attacked, but it was up to each independent state whether or not they would respond. In fact, each state had its own unique deal worked out with the imperial crown, which put further limits on the emperor's power. Some were expected to contribute money to military campaigns, but no soldiers. Some were expected to contribute soldiers, but no money. Some were under no obligation to offer anything at all. By the 17th century, the Holy Roman Emperor could no longer even have an opinion on religious matters, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of the holy part of their title.
Sure.
Although the imperial crown was remarkably weak, the Holy Roman Emperor usually controlled the most powerful state within the empire. Beginning in the 15th century and continuing up until the Napoleonic Wars, that meant that the Holy Roman Emperor was the Archduke of Austria. Since the 13th century, Austria had been controlled by the Habsburg family. The Habsburgs were one of the most powerful families in Europe, and at times over the last 500 years, they had controlled Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, the Kingdom of Germany, parts of northern Italy, Austria, Hungary, Croatia, Bohemia. I could go on. The dynasty was remarkably successful, and what made it especially remarkable is that very little of this territory was gained through conquest. It was instead gained diplomatically. The Austrian Habsburgs had a family motto: "Let others wage war, but thou, happy Austria, marry. For those kingdoms that Mars gives to others, Venus gives to thee."
Okay, I mean, that's pretty weird motto because that sounds very Roman of them. I don't know how far back Habsburgs go, but okay. But this is what I think Napoleon was trying to do when he appointed his family members to the different countries that was waging war against France. But because remember, France wasn't making war in the first 5 coalitions, right? They weren't invading countries, they were just protecting France, right? So Napoleon thought, this is my opinion, but I think Napoleon thought, if I put my family members in those states that are invading us, like Spain, like Italy, like Netherlands, right? Then maybe we don't go to war, right? And it looks like this is what sort of the Habsburgs also wanted, but then again, the Habsburgs are also famous for war, so it's a little bit contradictory, but it's a motto, right?
Others conquer through war. The Habsburgs conquer through marriage. Fast forward to the 19th century. The Holy Roman Emperor was still an Austrian Habsburg, now facing an expansionist France under Napoleon. He learned too late that the Holy Roman Empire was not equipped to face a direct attack. A victorious Napoleon demanded the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Habsburg Emperor, having decided that this powerless husk was no longer worth defending, agreed. With that, Austria became fully independent.
One thing though, because this is an argument that probably Austria made, that, oh, we need to have Holy Roman Empire there because it protects the weaker states or something. But then look at Austria, look at Bavaria, look at Saxony, look at Prussia. They've expanded and taken these small states, right? Look at Switzerland, right? They've conquered as well, right? How did they get those territories? Okay, through marriage, that's fine. Right? So the argument saying that, oh, Central Europe is weak if Holy Roman Empire is not there, well, it was already weak, and it was already invaded internally by those powers that had power outside the Holy Roman Empire and inside. But, okay.
Under its first emperor, Francis I. I lay all of that groundwork because by 1814, Austria was at a crossroads. The new Empire of Austria had played a critical role in the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte. But now what? They could reform the Holy Roman Empire if they wished, but did they wish? When push came to shove, some of the largest members of the empire sided with Napoleon. If the Holy Roman Empire wasn't a military alliance, what good was it? Yes, the title was prestigious, but you could argue that the restrictions within the empire only slowed Austria down, with no clear benefit. Francis, the former Holy Roman Emperor, and the current Austrian Emperor, was sympathetic to this point of view, as was his foreign minister, Metternich. Metternich is sometimes described as a conservative or a reactionary, but that's not quite right. A true reactionary would have fought to reform the Holy Roman Empire, but Metternich happily allowed it to die.
Yeah, that's true.
He was a realist, not that concerned with ideology, so long as it protected his hard-won peace. In his excellent and definitive biography of Metternich, Wolfram Zeeman writes that, quote, "This, the question of whether Metternich was a reactionary, disregards the experiences of human beings who were looking back at 25 years of war and revolution. The question contemporary witnesses asked themselves was whether the more than 3 million dead on the battlefields of Europe had died for any meaningful goal. In many peasant families, there were no male youths left."
I mean, this is true, but this is also an angle of just taking the blame on Napoleon when it was like half of the Europe waging war against France because of the revolution and that because they executed the monarchies. But on this point, right, 25 years of war and revolution, right, and peasants, no male youth left, 30 years war, 3 million dead, 30 years war, and it was mainly fought inside the Holy Roman Empire against each other, and then obviously outside forces came in like France, Sweden, Denmark. I think Austria was there obviously because they're part of the Holy Roman Empire, right? So I mean, it's a little bit, yeah, just Napoleon did this, that's why we not want to have the Holy Roman Empire left, right? Look at the entire history and you look, it wasn't that good at the end of its time. Maybe in the beginning, Charlemagne, sure, that was fine. But then it turned into something weak, unstable, very bloody, civil wars all the time. But okay.
That 3 million number is on the lower end of the spectrum. I've seen credible estimates of 5 to 7 million when you include civilians.
Yep.
Unthinkable loss. Nobody who lived through this period would ever be the same. Across France, 20% of the men born between 1790 and 1795 were dead. An entire generation of young men had been wiped out.
Yep.
But
I mean, that's always the case when sort of half or entire Europe is in a civil war on the continent, right? I mean, that's true on every continent, because you can look at all these wars that are waged in Europe as civil wars on the continent, same as the Chinese civil wars. Tens of millions. But it doesn't matter. Because here in, like I said, the 30 Years' War, same thing. lost a generation or multiple generations, atrocities on every side. Yeah.
That same book, Zeman provides the best summary of Metternich's worldview that I've ever seen. In
Okay.
Metternich's case, coming to terms with the war meant considering the suffering he had witnessed endless times on the battlefields and along the roads. Unnecessary, pointless, even a crime, caused by human delusions of grandeur that, he thought, could pull down the walls protecting civilization and the law as he understood it, at any time and in any place. It was the duty of politics to erect enduring barriers against this possibility. He opposed this catastrophe on humanitarian grounds, and his lasting commitment was never again.
Sure. And that's good. I agree with this, right? But then let's see his actions though. After this, right? Is Austria going to grow? Oh, but it wasn't a military conflict that made us grow, so that's fine then. Okay. But it's going to... I mean, Austria is just like the Balkans. It's a powder keg that is about to explode. Because even though it's so great that you didn't get the land mostly of conquering in warfare, you got it through marriage. But then look at Austria. Later Austria-Hungary, let's say 100 years later, 1914, Austria is about to explode. Literally, Austria-Hungarian Empire, it's about to explode. Why? Because they've conquered through peaceful means, sort of. Well, they have the military, but I mean, there wasn't a military to oppose them, so there was no war, basically, right? So, I mean, yes, it's good to say this, but it all... I don't know, he knew this. Maybe he wouldn't know this, because this is me looking at 2020 vision, right? But this is you saying something that is good, and I agree with, but then it turns into something that you maybe didn't want it to turn into. Because my argument is, this, that he's saying, and the Congress of Vienna, and then Vienna and Austrian Empire's action later on, will actually be its demise, like the Holy Roman Empire, right? It's just too much of nothing. And then they try to have a strong central government in Vienna that's controlling all these nationalities and different religions, right? That's going to explode. And we know it exploded.
Metternich saw balance between great powers as the answer.
But again, balance between powers led to the Napoleonic Wars, or a more bloody war. Again, this is a bad way of looking at it, because if it wasn't balanced, then one side would literally win, but maybe it wouldn't be that bloody. But if you have two opposing sides that sort of are equal in power, military force, or political sway, then it's gonna be much more bloodier. That's a civil war, basically. You see this in the Napoleonic Wars. Two vast sides that are sort of on the same level, although France is the underdog, right? Napoleon is the underdog, right? You see this definitely in World War I. You have built up these two alliances, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. Later, Italy will remove themselves from there, and Ottoman Empire will go to the Triple Entente, Triple Alliance, right? But you make the case that you need to have alliances so there's peace, but then those alliances oppose each other, and then at some point there has to be war, right? This is laying the groundworks for, I would say, Prussia's expansion, Austria's demise, Italy's expansion and unification, but then Europe's demise in a total sense from the World War I, right? This is all building up. Obviously, history is a red line, a red string that you can follow, obviously. But this here is, I would argue, the groundworks of World War One. You're trying to build these two vast opposing sides that are then, at some point in time, going to fight each other.
He feared a second French Revolution, or something like it, but he couldn't clearly see
Makes sense.
how Austria could possibly prevent one. However, with a balanced international system, any state seeking to dominate could simply be slapped down by everybody else.
This is, okay, this makes sense, but you already tried this. This is the problem with this. He wants to stop revolutions from happening, definitely revolutions against monarchies to happen, right? Because let's say this. Let's just make this, I don't know, let's say France becomes a republic in 1816. And the coalition here does nothing. They say, oh, that's fine, nothing happens here. No one has killed the monarch or whatever. But then a royalist revolution happens. What do the monarchies of Europe do? Do they wage war again, but contradict? Metternich contradicts himself to say, we want peace and stability and no war. But then, when a royalist revolution, this is just fictional, right? But let's say it happens. What would Austria do? What would Metternich think that Austria should do? I digress.
This theory for peace played into Austrian strengths. Ever since the French Revolution, Austria had positioned itself as the defender of precedent and tradition and the rule of law. Accordingly, they began to expand their diplomatic influence and cultivate a following of smaller states, especially in Central Europe, who feared.
And they already had that because the previous Holy Roman Emperor was Francis. So you already have some sort of hand in the game, right?
Being swallowed up by the regional instability that would inevitably follow the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire.
Right, so you don't want France to conquer, but you say, oh, I want to conquer. Which makes sense, because you want to be that, because you want your empire to be larger than your supposed enemy, right? Okay.
Before proceeding, it would be helpful to discuss what the Austrian Empire actually was. What we're really talking about here is the personal holdings of the Habsburg family, which included the lands that had been the Duchy of Austria, but it also included the Kingdom of Hungary, the Kingdom of Bohemia, the Kingdom of Croatia, along with a hodgepodge of other titles.
There you have an example, like I showed, of what an empire, in our definition and in sort of history, defines it as, right? You have different kingdoms inside the same border, and a king is chosen to be the king of kings, right? So that's an emperor in this case here, right?
It may be helpful to look at the ethnic breakdown of the Austrian Empire, because this will tell you everything you need to know about Austrian politics. First and foremost, there was the German-speaking core, centered around Vienna and the old Duchy of Austria. Then there were the Magyars of Hungary, who spoke Hungarian. The third major group were the Bohemians, who spoke Czech. Then in the
and look at that border, it looks like Czechia today, right? Czech Republic, right? That's pretty cool.
borderlands, there were Croats, Serbs, Slovaks, and others who spoke various
Slovenes.
Slavic languages. To the east, there was Transylvania, whose inhabitants spoke Romanian. There were also regions where the majority spoke Polish and Ukrainian. And although this wasn't the case at this exact moment, the Austrian Empire would soon have a large Italian minority as well. By one count, the Austrian Empire consisted of 14 ethnic groups, speaking 17 different languages.
And again, well, not again, but this is one of the main reason why it would explode in 100 years, 104 years, right? Austria-Hungary Empire, right? in the Holy Roman Empire, this was also the case, but there were more commonalities with each other, right? Because I would argue Bohemians have a lot more in common with Germans and Austrians than Hungarians have, because this is pretty astonishing, because the Hungarian language has no connection to any European country except Finland, which is just, obviously that has to do with some people migrating somewhere, but still a tribe or something, I don't know. But that's astonishing. I mean, Hungary is basically like a little bit east to Central Europe, and I mean, it's just in the middle of everything. And then you have Finland. Right? But this is sort of one reason why the Holy Roman Empire didn't actually work. But it wasn't as big and as pronounced as it is in the Austrian Empire. Now, 1814, and then in the 20th century.
The Austrian Empire was really an incredible experiment, one that you don't see anywhere else in the 19th
Except
century.
in the US.
This was not the case of one ethnic group dominating their neighbors. This was a
Yep.
true synthesis of cultures and ethnicity.
Although he says there isn't one ethnicity that is over anyone else, but what is the empire called? The Austrian Empire. And where is the capital? Vienna, which is in Austria. So who is the ruling class of the Austrian Empire at this point and further on? The Austrians. And we will see revolutions from the Hungarians. You will see uprisings in southern Austria as well, right? But this is sort of precursor to America and Canada, right? Where you have this just hodgepodge of different people from different backgrounds, speaking different languages, different cultures, different religions. But still, the central point is the advancement and the same ideology of Americanism. Here, it's not. Here is the one of the ethnic groups or cultures ruling over everybody else, right? And it's not that good that you have an emperor that's going to rule up to down, right? But okay.
United under the Habsburg Emperor.
Yep.
In the eyes of the Habsburg Emperor, all of these holdings were at least theoretically co-equal, which made administering the empire the world's most complicated balancing act.
Yep.
The constraints within the Habsburg system become clear when you look at the crown's relationship with the Kingdom of Hungary.
Uh-oh.
The Kingdom of Hungary was home to more than just the ethnic Hungarian population. And
Yep.
when you add everybody together, it accounted for 35 to 40% of the Austrian Empire's total population. That fact alone should make it clear why there was tension between the Austrian Germans and the Hungarians. The
Yep.
Habsburg Emperor ruled Hungary as their king, but he was not one of them, and so he was bound by severe constitutional limitations.
Which is
One of
good.
these limitations was that the Hungarian king was not allowed to tax the people of Hungary. The local Hungarian aristocracy was allowed to tax the people, but they were under no obligation to pass that money along to their king. Again, this is 35 to 40% of the empire's population we're talking about. This exemption created a massive hole in the imperial budget that Austria was constantly trying to fill. Over the centuries, this arrangement resulted in the Hungarian aristocracy becoming extremely rich, even though the Hungarian people remained quite poor compared to the German-speaking population to the west. The Hungarian king was also constrained when it came to military recruitment. Despite being home to 35 to 40% of the Austrian Empire, Hungarian subjects only made up like 5% of its military. This number could fluctuate. During the Napoleonic Wars, it climbed as high as 20%. But in order to accomplish that, the Habsburg Emperor had to go to the Hungarian aristocracy and give them whatever they wanted.
Wow.
This tenuous constitutional
This doesn't
relationship
work.
meant that Austria was cursed in a way to be in constant negotiations with
Yep.
itself. The Hungarians were always suspicious of any territorial gains that added more ethnic Germans to the empire.
Yep.
The whole political system was a delicate balance, and
Maybe that's what Metternich wanted. More Austrians or Germans, right? So they can have the Hungarian problem, whatever they want to call it, right? The hole in their empire plugged up, right? And they don't want the problems of the Holy Roman Empire. They just want to gobble up for themselves.
And if the ethnic Germans got something, the Hungarians always wanted something too. Despite all of its contradictions, the Austrian Empire had a lot of credibility on the international stage. Whatever the reasons, the fact that Austria was not primarily concerned with territorial expansion mattered a lot, especially to
Makes
all
sense.
those tiny Central European states who had recently been made vulnerable by the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire.
And then you contrast that with Prussia, which is very expansionist, right? Although Austria says it's not expansionist, but then what happened with Poland? Right? They carved Poland off the map, and then Napoleon put it back, and then they carved it up again. And in the Congress of Vienna, they were talking about Poland and Saxony, right?
It meant that despite having the weakest military of the great powers, Austria had a lot of friends, at a time when having a lot of friends was a valuable thing to have.
Which is the Habsburg saying, right? They have less military, but they have more friends, which is actually their family members or descendants of their family members, you know? Nice.
None of this was true of the other German great power. In many ways, Austria's mirror opposite. Where Austria was old, they were young. Where Austria was defined by their diversity, they were defined by their Germanness. Where Austria was weaker militarily than they could be, they were stronger militarily than they ought to be. Where Austria was not that interested in territorial expansion, they were obsessed with it to the point where they thought of very little else. The two German great powers were brothers, but they were brothers that did not get along.
Stepbrothers. Okay, Prussia now.
In 1814, the thing that defined Prussia was its precarity. It was the smallest of the great powers, in every way. It had a tiny population of 10 million people, 3 times less populous than France, and almost 5 times less populous than Russia. It was also small geographically. As you can see, its tiny population was crammed into a bunch of isolated pockets that weren't even connected to each other. It was also precarious in its positioning. As I've already discussed, Central Europe was no longer under the protection of the Holy Roman Empire, which meant that...
I mean, if you want a comparison, Prussia is in a slightly better position than Poland was, right? Because Poland was in between everybody. Prussia is in between everybody, but then to their east, or immediate east, they have sort of nobody. They have Hanover, which is controlled by the Brits because the kings are they're kings of Hanover, and now they're kings of Britain, UK, right? So they are in a bad spot, but they're also, it's like the US before Manifest Destiny. They have sort of enemies to the north, they have no other enemy, so they just expand westward, which is what Prussia is going to do. Spoiler, right? They're going to expand west and south as well.
That tiny Prussia was now vulnerable to its much larger neighbors. Vulnerable might be underselling it. The Prussians had enlisted Russian help against the French, but now there were Russians everywhere. Poland was under joint Russian and Prussian occupation, but there were also Russians occupying the Polish-speaking areas of eastern Prussia, and they weren't leaving.
And the Polish-speaking Prussian parts are the parts of Poland and Lithuania, or Poland that Prussia took, and then Russia took, and then Austria took, right? I'll do a video on the partitioning of Poland, or some sort of context of that, right?
Russians were also occupying Saxony along Prussia's southern border, and these guys weren't leaving either.
Nope.
Central Europe was in a state of flux. It was clear to everybody that Russia saw opportunity here, which was entirely antithetical to the balance of power principle.
But let's think about this. What does Alexander want, or Russia want? Let's hear, if you're still watching this, comment down below. What do you think Alexander and Russia wants? Do you think they want land, like expand the Russian border? Or do you think they want more influence like Austria has? More friends, if you like. Right? More political sway, more say in something when something is happening in Europe or around the world. I would argue the latter, right? Sure, they might want Poland physically, but it would be maybe better for Russia if they could go in and have some more political power in Europe as a whole instead of just land in Poland or Saxony or whatever. Right? But comment down below.
The other great powers would have no choice but to respond. In the eyes of people like Metternich and Castlereagh, Russia had to remove itself from Central Europe if there was ever to be peace. Prussia had to become the kind of great power that was capable of resisting Russian influence.
So if that's their whole point, which makes sense because the next major European war after the first Schleswig-Holstein War is the Crimean War, because they look at Russia, or they're trying to expand and attacking the Ottoman Empire. We have to protect them and attack Russia and make them smaller. Which again you can see, which this is why I like history, right? You can see the red string, the red line, whatever you want to call it here. The coalitions are allowing Prussia to expand, and they want to make Russia smaller or less influential, right? In World War I, who would be on whose side? Right? You would have Russia with the Brits and French, right? And then you would have the German Empire, Prussia, because it's the Prussian kings that are emperors, with Austria and Ottoman Empire, right? So they're sort of creating the beast that they didn't want. But then again, for their time, their perspective is, we have had a lot of wars in Central Europe, especially, right? So we want to make Central Europe more powerful so it could defend itself, right? Which makes sense.
That was the priority of the Prussian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Karl August von Hardenberg. The experience with Napoleon had taught Hardenberg that Prussia was not yet a true great power. It was powerful regionally, but it was too small to have a global impact. In order to graduate from a regional power to a great power, Prussia needed people, Prussia needed resources, and Prussia needed territory.
Yep.
This line between a strong regional power and a weak great power is a fuzzy one. Eric Hobsbawm writes that, quote, Austria and Prussia were really great powers by courtesy only. Continuing later, their chief function was to act as European stabilizers.
True.
It's true that Austria and Prussia could not match the global influence of France.
Because again, let's just look at the map. Let's think of World War I. They are the stabilizers, but they're not supposed to be that expansionary, right? And who are they stabilizing against and for who? I would argue they're stabilizing for, because this is Britain's play, right? They're stabilizing Britain, so Britain doesn't have to get involved in Central Europe, because Central Europe is weak. So they're sort of buffers against Austria and Prussia, but then Austria and Prussia are there to protect Central Europe against Russia, right? And Ottoman Empire, but Ottoman Empire at this point is still sort of strong, but they're getting weaker, right?
Britain and Russia. I would quibble slightly and say that Austria's diplomatic influence at this time made them a great power, but it's true that Prussia lacked the global reach of any of the other powers. The only reason everybody decided to treat them as a great power was their formidable military. By the end of the
This
war,
is true.
on a per capita basis, Prussia was fielding 6 times more
Yeah.
soldiers than Austria, which meant that despite their relative weakness, they were capable of going toe-to-toe with any other great power.
Which again, look at this. This is a comparison to taxes, I would argue, right? You have large taxes, you get less money, and it's very inefficient. You have less taxes, you have more to get, and it's very efficient. We saw that with Austrian Empire, we saw that Hungary is basically just there on the map, but people aren't there to conscript or whatever, taxes aren't there.
Hardenberg saw in Prussia an urgent need for territorial expansion. All of these isolated enclaves would not do. They were just asking to be swallowed up by some stronger power. In the
Yep.
upcoming peace conference, Prussia hoped to gain some territorial coherence and become a true great power with global influence.
And they were at Waterloo, so you know.
The original plan was for the 4 victorious great powers, Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, to dominate the peace conference and impose their will upon everyone else.
Makes
But
sense.
Tsar Alexander's behavior had begun to make people nervous, and Russia's
Okay.
creeping domination over Prussia seemed a disaster waiting to happen. If there was a serious
Okay.
split at the conference, with
Because look at this. Prussia and Russia, do they want the same thing? I would argue Russia wants political influence and Prussia wants territory. And Russia can give Prussia territory, and I think Prussia can give Russia sort of political influence in the European courts.
Britain and Austria on one side and Russia and Prussia on the other, it was difficult to imagine how they could possibly resolve it without descending into another war. Metternich and Castlereagh saw this looming crisis before them, and so they approached Talleyrand and asked him
Makes
to
sense.
represent France at Vienna. France remained a great power, and so
Yep.
it made very little sense to exclude them from shaping the post-war world. Besides, Napoleon Bonaparte had been defeated and removed from power, which meant
Yep.
that France was theoretically a normal country again. Naturally,
Normal.
nothing could have pleased Talleyrand more. Castlereagh and Metternich pulled in Hardenberg of Prussia, who was still keen on finding a way to resist Russian influence, and got him to agree. This left Tsar Alexander isolated when the 4 other great powers came to him and demanded that France be given a seat at the Congress. He, of course, threw a fit, but then reluctantly agreed. Over the summer, everybody traveled to Vienna. And by everybody, I mean everybody. Virtually every state in Europe sent delegations. And
Imagine
some
being there.
states that didn't even
Wow.
exist anymore sent delegations as well. After decades of war, a festive, slightly euphoric mood took over the city. Peace
Okay.
was at hand. When September
Sure.
rolled around, the real work began.
All right, that was awesome. The first part, I like his approach of the Congress of Vienna. He's setting up the basics, setting up the different countries and powers, their influence, maybe what they want, what they need, why they want it. I like it. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.